without further ado, let's dive right into our executive panel, and this is insights from the top floor on external development. And we've got 4 fantastic panelists. Darryl Long, who is the Managing Director of Ubisoft Winnipeg. Gilles Langourieux, the CEO of Virtuos. He's going to kill me for butchering his name. Robyn Foerster, Head of Operations Bioware. And Andrew Day, who is the CEO of Keywords. Welcome, everybody. We have some fantastic questions today that have come in from far and wide, and also they've been vetted by the XDS committee that put all of this together. And I've got a question that's going to be for everybody, and we have some great questions here. So we've got a lot of information that's going to be coming from the stage. We're just going to jump right in. And this is for everybody, based on the overwhelming interest in XDS, the attendance here today, it's fair to say that external development continues to be critical to the success of building our titles. More and more work is being sent to service providers than ever before, and in new domains. For example, the XDS Insights report found with 47% of developers surveyed spent $6 to $10 million for external engagements last year, with 10% of those spending over $26 million. Based on the recent experiences from the developer and services side, are you seeing developers' growing reliance on external development, and how are you seeing this evolve, if so? Gilles?
Well, yes, we are. And I think it's a very positive sign for our industry, because it's a sign of maturing. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what happens when industries mature. They tend to specialize to be better and more efficient at what they do. So seeing that trend continue year over year, I think is encouraging, and it's needed for industry if we are to continue making bigger games and games that run on much more demanding platforms.
Right. Darryl, I'd like to hear from you.
The games that we're making right now, they just keep getting bigger and bigger, right? And it doesn't make sense anymore to try and keep all that in-house. Teams get too big, it's too complicated. And in fact, the challenges that you face running a really, really big team, like Far Cry 5, such a huge team, trying to keep them all working, it's not that different challenge-wise than working with an external partner.
Right.
So facing those same challenges and trying to make it work, it makes sense to rely on the external partners and make the most of them.
Robyn?
Yeah, I mean, Bioware has kind of an interesting situation in that we actually have 2 different locations. We have Austin and Edmonton, so we have had to learn to work across those locations on a single title. I think that we've also taken our learning from working with external development into that relationship, which is interesting and not really so much the other way. So we're comfortable with working with externals not in our studio. I think it's definitely the way that things will go. I think it's going to be more and more and start to look different as time passes, and already some of our strategies we think about how to work with partners are starting to evolve beyond simply a resource for content or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything. So I think, today's games are getting bigger and more complex. The different types of monetization models that are out there, the global nature of games, and this sort of relentless consumer that we've got that's just continuously consuming content is putting a lot of pressure on the industry to pump out good, engaging content. And trying to do that all yourself, as was the case sort of 10 years ago, is really not something that most people would contemplate these days. So I think outsourced development, external development, and doing so in a more sort of strategic, more partnering type of relationship is something that we're seeing developing very rapidly. And I think it's what we're here for. It's what companies like Virtuos and Keywords and many others in the audience have built themselves for. So long may it continue.
Yeah, I used to visit Ubisoft Montreal, and they used to have about 6 games going on the floor at one time. Then it became 2 games, and then 1 game on 3 floors. And so you can really recognize that you need to diversify. You need to kind of reach out to the community. Now, this question is for Robyn and Darryl. As we discussed, more work is going out of house in order to support your large and complex titles. Would you say that there are areas of development that are overly difficult or perhaps impossible to share with an external partner? Furthermore, are you seeing disciplines or game areas going external today that you would have thought unfeasible only 2 or 3 years ago? Robyn?
Yes. So a couple of years ago, Bioware did no outsourcing in the realm of software engineering at all. Now about 5% of our programming is outsourced, and I recognize that that does not seem like a big number, but it's 11 times what it was a year ago. So that's a very big jump for us. So I think that's one of those things that we did it because we needed to, not because it was necessarily a conscious choice. I think going forward now, that's a strategy for us. It's like we were able to do it on an emergent basis. How would that be if we did it with planning and foresight? I think one of the areas where we continue to be challenged is just around design, particularly level design, and the complexity of assembling a level and an entire experience. I think we've come a long way in being able to build a world with tile sets that are outsourced, but actually laying out the experience in there, I don't know, it's a nut I'd like to figure out how to crack, because I think we would be able to have a much greater volume of experiences in our products.
Darryl?
Well, absolutely, I agree. We've become very good. We've matured to the point as an industry where we can co-develop assets and create them regularly, but we have yet to get across that barrier with open worlds. And in Montreal and Toronto, Ubisoft titles, they're all big open worlds, many of them.
Right.
And we're not able to take a chunk of that world and give it to an external partner and have them produce it independently. And really that comes down to, in my opinion, that comes down to technology. We don't have the technology to allow external partners to build that data. We don't have the ability to move that data back and forth. We're talking with these huge games. It's hundreds of gigabytes of data that need to pass back and forth every day.
Right.
How do you manage that without being on the same infrastructure as your co-dev partners? So right now there's a huge barrier between an internal partner and an external partner when it comes to building an open world. And actually that's what the Winnipeg studio is trying to do, is build that infrastructure so we can begin to externalize with new tools and technology how we build our open world games.
And I'm sure Andrew and Gilles are trying to figure out that very thing right now as well.
Well, it's going to be a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
To Darryl's point, the technology being the bottleneck, I think this is something that a more mature industry, like the movies industry, has tackled a long time ago, and they've established standards which allow all the different vendors, providers to the studios to collaborate together around the
There's a language that everybody speaks.
Granted, it's easier for them because their medium is not interactive.
Yeah.
But I think we have to collaboratively together come up with similar standards so that we push back the limits of what can be done in a distributed way.
Okay, well, I've got a question for the both of you. During last year's panel, we discussed top challenges that service providers have with their client partners, and that wasn't awkward at all. This time around, I'd like to turn the tables on Andrew and Gilles and as our service provider representatives. Citing the XDS Insights report, the top challenges developers have with their external partners include number 1, poor quality deliverables, number 2, too many iterations, and number 3, as you would expect, communication challenges. Does this match into to your own experiences, and can you explain why these may have surfaced as top struggles? Andrew.
Certainly not. We don't have any of those.
Oh, yeah.
No, I think you know, as an industry as a whole, we're learning to work in a more collaborative fashion. I think distributed development is something we're all getting to grips with. Communication, trust, openness are absolutely key to that. I think realizing that not everything's going to go smoothly, and how you react when something doesn't go quite according to plan is all part of it. I think, you know, the best relationships, and I'm sure you guys will be able to jump in on this as well, is where the service provider team feels like a real extension of your own development teams, with no barriers in between,
right.
No account managers trying to filter communications backwards and forwards and so on.
Right.
So I think when we can get to that point, and the technical platforms that we used for that collaboration to reduce the number of iterations, you know, the number of participation in stand-ups, even if that's done remotely, all of these things are really, really important to be part of the same team. And together with some tools development that we're all busy working on, and tools that we're bringing in from outside the industry, I think they're helping the industry evolve into this more distributed, more partner-based model.
Awesome. Gilles, anything to add?
Yes, so the issues that you described, there are symptoms
Yes.
of something that is going wrong. So if I take a step back and I ask myself, well, what are some of the common causes? I see two very common causes. One is the lack of deep planning of the engagements.
Right.
And the second one is, Darryl alluded to the difficulty of doing that. It's having pipelines which can be shared. On the planning side, we're coming up with solutions where we give visibility to our clients on what does their current planning look like, where we can see, and what is likely to happen if this is how they work. For example, we show them the backlog of what they put in the backlog so far, and is this going to be deep enough to move at the speed that they want to work on.
Right.
Because speed is a function of having properly planned what you put in the pipeline.
Are there support companies that are, experts in working with support companies? Sort of working with a main developer and saying, well, these are some of the standards or some of the ways that you could work together with a bunch of specialists?
I don't
There are a ton of consultants.
But
Someone could build that right now. Right now, let's do that. Okay, Robyn and Darryl, based on the XDS Insights report on external development, developers surveyed reported that the top ranking criteria used to select their service providers include number 1, quality of work, number 2, the rates, and number 3, skill set or capabilities. From your own experience, would you agree that quality of work is more crucial to success than the other factors? Robyn?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think you need some reasonable combination of all of those things in order to succeed. I mean, quality is certainly important, but I would say one of the challenges is actually determining what the right quality level is for your assets. And we all know that when you're making a video game, it's like there's a whole bunch of things that need to be AAA, and then there's a bunch of things that are okay to be B. And it doesn't mean you should go seeking a B-level external partner, of course, but that's part of the challenge too, is actually getting shared understanding of what are the things that need to be really top-notch and what are the things that don't have to be because of the reality of putting the game together. And the other thing I would say, further to the communication thing, is we do actually consider location as one of our factors. It's not something we can always work with successfully, but certainly having somebody who's in a time zone where you can reasonably put a group together to have a conversation or a meeting is super helpful, and then I think beyond that.
That's a very interesting sort of way to look at it. Do you think that there are developers in the world that have flourished in their sort of partnerships with external developers based on their time zone, based on where they're at?
I sure think it helps. I mean, at the end of the day, every problem gets solved with great communication or averted before it becomes a problem with great communication. So the more accessible your partner feels, the more you are able to fold them in on your day-to-day. Can you include them in your stand-ups? Can you have regular conference calls? How does that fit? And even if you're working with multiple externals across multiple timelines, the complexity builds from that. So proximity is a factor, I think, for us, for sure, when we're thinking about who do we want to work with. It doesn't always work out, but there are realities there.
Darryl, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, working on Far Cry 5, for example, it's such a big game that we couldn't afford to manage multiple external partners. It was already complex enough. It's a big team working on a lot of different things at the same time.
Yep.
So, of course, yes, we're looking for dependability on quality, consistent online or on-time delivery as well, but understanding our technology and having the ability to use the tech that we're using to produce our assets is also very important. Once we've invested in the training of a team, to use our pipelines and PBR and everything else, we don't want to have to retrain them again for the next game and for the next game, for the next game. So we're looking for partners who have the breadth of experience that they can actually assemble a team and keep them dedicated to us for a long term, and we can capitalize on that investment of training.
This isn't on the list of questions, but I'm curious as a player and as a follower of all of this. Andrew Wilson has recently been on the record about, he's the head of EA, talking about artificial intelligence becoming a bigger part of game development. I'd love to hear from all of you how that may impact all aspects of your current businesses. Gilles?
It's big. It's going fast. It's one of the reasons why we raised a significant amount of funds earlier this year to grow our R&D teams. I think some areas will be more affected than others.
Yep.
I think some areas will be faster to automate than others. But I do think that the consequences are going to be very important.
We have to be ready for it.
And we definitely have to be ready, and we can't wait. We need to be on top of it.
Andrew?
Yeah, a bit like Gilles, but perhaps we've approached it in slightly different ways. So we have been using artificial intelligence, machine learning in areas like localization for some time. We're using it in testing. We're using it in player understanding and behavioral mapping of players to help our customers monetize their games and to help retention and to help players progress through the game.
Amazing.
So it's an integral part of what we're doing. I think the issue is how quickly you can apply it. I think sometimes people think you can sort of, get rid of artists, get rid of QA people by using machines instead. The truth of the matter is somewhat different. I think what artificial intelligence tends to allow you to do at the end of the day is to do more with less. So it's additive. It's
about scale,
really.
right?
It's about scale, and it's about perhaps testing the game a little bit more than you would have done otherwise, or it's about translating more content than you would otherwise have had the funds to do, and so on. So I think it's helpful for the industry, and it's certainly something that we embrace wherever we can.
Right, Robyn?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally enamored and in love with the idea of AI and how it can impact your experience as a player. Actually, I had a 3-year stint with a quantum computer company.
Cool.
And what we did was a lot of AI and a lot of machine learning. And I mean, the applications are just huge. There are so many options. Like, imagine being able to play in a game where you have, where you may not even have to play with another human, but your AI plays like you want to play. So it learns from you how you play and then adapts itself to you. So it's no longer just, one through line on a mission. It's like your followers or helpers or other players can be responsive to you and your experience, and I love that idea. And just even to play a game that was like that, where it was like, this is really my experience, not Andrew's experience, it's my experience.
Right.
And that's super cool, I think.
Yeah, I guess from the development side, you've worked with AI so much in the game making process that fear of robots making games for robots is not that prevalent. You understand that harnessing all of that power for good could be an incredible boon for the games industry.
Totally.
Do you agree with that, Darryl? Or?
Totally.
Yeah.
And thank you for throwing this one. It's right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Our studio, the focus is to build new technology to allow us to make big open world games.
Yes.
Right? We're looking at how we're going to be building games 10 years from now and trying to develop that technology. AI is a huge part of that, but people don't really understand the potential yet.
Yes.
And I like to use the example of, 10 years ago, we were all placing every tree by hand.
Right.
And that was a limit on how much world we could create. And I completely agree with your point that we don't use AI to replace jobs. We use it to make more and bigger games.
Well, there's an excellent example right now with what Ubisoft is doing with Beyond Good and Evil 2. They've actually crowdsourced the art by working with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's, I forget the name of his company, but what's it called? Record That? Hit record, right. Hit record. And so he's gone off into the artistic community and sort of asked creators to build aspects of what will be employed in the game world. If we had AI that was able to do that, the scale of that size would not be so terrifying.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, the AI is able to learn from what it has around it and take from the examples that already exist and build on them. You know, the difficulty with AI is always training.
Yes.
It's not about the AI itself.
We've all seen Terminator.
It was very well trained though.
You just see developers' computers get off their desks and start chasing everybody around. Okay, this is almost like a separate panel, I think, about AI here. Andrew and Gilles, we would not do justice to this session without asking one question about the consolidation of service providers we've seen in recent years, and I'm looking at you, Andrew and Gilles. The estimated spend on mergers and acquisitions in 2017 was an estimated $136 million with a much higher volume of deals than in previous, which was a much higher volume of deals than in previous years. There are some who would proclaim that this is the demise of independent service providers. Who proclaims that? Is anyone? Okay. I think
Come and see me afterwards.
I think they all work for you, don't they, Andrew? This is the demise of independent service providers as we know it. Would you say that independent studios are less viable now than they were in the past? And how are you doing your part to preserve their studio culture once acquired? And we'll get those questions, and I've got to follow up with Darryl and Robyn. So, Gilles?
Don't look at me, ask Andrew.
Okay.
I'm innocent.
Is there a deal happening as we say?
Well, no, he's doing his share as well.
Oh, yeah.
But I know this question is written for me, right?
Right.
So, yeah, no, I mean, I think, you know, this is all part of the same story. It's the evolution of the games industry. It's a maturing industry. It's one where, you know, outsourcing has been has crept into the industry from a situation only 10 years ago where every game was built in a vertical sort of manner by studios and publishers and so on. That became too difficult, so sort of at a lower level there was more and more outsourcing going on a very tactical basis. Outsourcing has become a little bit more integrated. We're being engaged by our clients like Bioware and Ubisoft at an earlier stage in development, so we're becoming more and more strategic as we do that.
Right.
And as that happens, so it becomes harder and harder for our clients to outsource to tens and 50 or whatever vendors in a single project. So you have to have vendors in the industry that have the scale to engage at that more strategic level.
Right.
And the industry wasn't set up in a way that enabled that. So the only way it could happen was for a degree of consolidation to happen. If you think about the client side of the industry, our clients are huge global organization, billions of dollars, multi-sites, multi-country, global organizations. And the supplier side is basically made up, or was basically made up, of lots of small owner-managed businesses, all very good at what they're doing, all very specialized in the services
Yes.
they're providing to a very complex and specialized industry, which is the games industry. But for that evolution to be allowed to happen, we have to have a degree of consolidation.
Right.
So it shouldn't be something that's looked on as a bad thing. It's kind of, it's necessary, otherwise we will end up constraining our industry. There's a whole bunch of stuff in your question about culture and everything, but I might let Gilles have a go here, and then we'll come back and talk about culture and preservation of identity and so on.
Perfect.
What Keywords has done on the market has had a very positive impact because it's given value to service companies which in the past were very much undervalued and had frankly difficulty raising funds.
Right.
And I think it's made the ecosystem much more healthy from that standpoint. Secondly, yes, Virtuos is also in the market, but looking at targeted acquisitions, because we want to address issues like the issue that Robyn mentioned of having vendors in the same time zone, which means us as a group, we need to make sure that we have presence in different time zones. Thirdly, when we talk about the dangers of consolidation, I think we should also look at other spaces like the software space. And we're currently accepting to use tools that are very much concentrated into the hands of one or two companies. And as a group, I feel we should be addressing that risk. This is a more urgent risk to me, and I think to my clients, because when you have groups that are in a position to dictate very high price increases year after year.
Right.
Collaboratively, we could work on having shared tools,
Right.
open source tools maybe, which do not let such a monopolistic situation happen.
Wow.
I see more danger there.
Okay. Wow. What brings an employee to companies like yours? Is it the sense that they aren't committed to one project and they can bounce and then I think that maybe adds value to the client side as well a little bit?
Yeah, I think for us that's an important measure of success, is to what extent are people attracted to coming to work at Keywords or one of our studios. And I think a lot of it is to do with that. You know, it's the fact that we get to work on, I don't know, 500 games a year.
Wow.
So there's a huge variety, not only variety of games, but many of the world's leading games.
Right.
So if you're an artist, you're not constrained to working on the same type of game year after year after year, and that can lead to a bit of fatigue, so you can mix it up a little bit. Likewise, if you're a tester, if you're an engineer, you get exposed to more challenges, more proprietary game engines, as well as the more standard game engines that are out there. So I think a degree of variety, but also, you know, the rewards that come from being part of a public company in the case of Keywords, so share options and things like that are an attraction, and being able to be recognized, you know, in terms of value in the industry somehow.
Well, let's go back onto the company culture question, because I think that's important. We're going to be talking to Robyn pretty soon, who has a distinct culture with Bioware to talk about. But how do you preserve that when you're in acquisition mode?
We haven't done many of them. The major one we've done was an animation company called Sparks, which was a studio in Ho Chi Minh City. And I think we did two things. First, we demonstrated to them that we were there to help and support rather than dictate.
Right.
So the mode of communication was much more, tell us what you need, tell us what kind of issues you have, and we'll respond and tell you how we can help you. And secondly, we let them maintain the culture that they had from their past, the way that they were used to work, producing animation, working on certain kinds of high quality titles. So a couple of years down the road, what they have is a studio which has flourished thanks to the help, funding that we provided, but a studio that is still very unique in the Vietnamese landscape and also in the global scene, because it gets to work on many AAA games, as well as all the Star Wars movies and the Star Wars Rebels TV series.
Fantastic. And Andrew, Keywords is all over the place. You've got a lot of different divisions. How do you maintain that individualism? You know, for
yeah, so I think it begins with the kind of acquisition. Well, first of all, it begins in the beginning, where you actually create a culture and how a culture emerges. But then, as you go through a process of acquisition, for us at least, it's been our single most important criteria when looking at companies to invite to join the Keywords group, has been the cultural fit. You know, are these companies like us? Do they share the same sort of cultural values? Now, I have to say that being in the games industry, we're incredibly fortunate in that Keywords, original Keywords today, is made up of people that are hugely passionate about video games, right? So that's a common cultural thread that runs through it. The next sort of thing is a question of people just wanting to do the very best for the projects that they're entrusted with. And the trick as a management team, because management can very negatively impact culture if you're not careful. The trick as a management team is to support those people to do the best for the project and not to get in the way. And if you can empower people at that level, you build a culture which is, in my mind, it's ideally suited to the sort of work that we do and the sort of engagements we have with our clients, because it sort of marries what the clients are doing in terms of building teams around their IPs as well as they're building their games and as they're operating their game in live operations.
Awesome. Let's move on to Darryl and Robyn for a sec. What impact do you believe these acquisitions to make to developers like yourself who are accustomed to working with independent service providers? We'll start with you, Darryl.
Well, it does allow us to build a relationship where it is a one-stop shop, and we have the opportunity to work with one vendor who can provide a lot of assets. But I mean, the real question is the consolidation within the industry. And I think we need to remember that it is still a creative industry, right?
Yeah.
We're in this because we love making video games. And in the same way that in video games you have the big companies, you still have the indie companies. And some of my favorite games are indie games.
Yeah.
And I think that the consolidation in the co-development space is also creating an opportunity for indie co-developers who will be specializing in something particular, who will be able to come with extremely creative ideas and do something that's a little different and provide a service that, you know, is new, is innovative, is something that the bigger companies like Ubisoft will chase because they're providing a service unlike what's out there.
We're seeing Sega do that right now. They just had an incredible success with Sonic Mania, which is almost like a Sega Genesis version of the Sonic character. And they've just announced Streets of Rage 4, which is also going back. But it's smaller teams putting these properties together, which is a really clever idea. Yeah. Robyn?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I like about external partners, and just in general, something I think about a fair bit, is diversity. And I don't mean diversity by gender or race, which tends to be how we think about it, but really diversity of mindset. So how do we think about our work, and how do we bring that to what we do every day? And so that's probably my biggest concern is, I mean, there's all the things that we overtly worry about, like how will it affect our rates? But at the end of the day, I really do want to have different ideas and different opinions, and I'm worried the most about it becoming sort of just a homogenous collection of
So it's a big studio just getting another big studio.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you think it benefits that the people that are involved in a provider work on so many different projects and have so many different processes and learn from the entire industry? Does that benefit a company like Bioware?
I think it can.
Yeah.
I think it can, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, this is for everybody. Let's talk about the, as of this past E3, streaming and subscription-based services seem to be a leading topic of discussion among developers. It's clear at this point that subscriptions and streaming could have major influence on the demand for content. How do you envision this change this will change how games are delivered and make an impact to today's external development? Robyn, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's going to change our world quite a bit. And we've started to spend some time thinking about that at Bioware, fairly purposefully. There's the huge content requirement, which is not to be underestimated. There's a whole bunch of work just on catalog. Like, think about how many of these game companies have these deep, rich catalogs of games that we can't access anymore because, frankly, who has these old consoles around? So even just the act of moving some of those things into the current day, I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and that would be hugely beneficial to both service providers and to game companies, and that's a big part of what will fill our subscription service, I think.
Right. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I just think we've seen how fast the industry's grown to whatever 130 odd billion. We've seen the explosion of content, but I think we ain't seen nothing yet.
No.
You know,
No.
When streaming starts, it's going to take us to a whole new level.
Right.
And how on earth are we going to keep up with that demand? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, certainly more reliance on external developers, whether it's porting content, whether it's maintaining content in live operation. more use of technologies and tools, but honestly, our world's going to get a whole lot more big and exciting from here on, I think.
We have all of these distinctions and these categories, almost these little clubhouses. There's mobile, and there's Nintendo players, and there's Xbox players, and do you think in the world of streaming that all blends, and the policies and the way and the practices of developers really just, you won't be able to tell one from another?
I mean, personally, I doubt it. I mean, I think there's always space for differentiation, right? I mean, and the experience you provide to somebody that's choosing to stream content onto a mobile device might be a different experience from the experience of what somebody's going to be streaming it onto a big 4K TV.
Right.
And I think, you know, challenges of making successful content, you still need to be able to differentiate it somehow. So I don't think that's going to go away. I don't think you're just going to get this convergence of everything into one sort of form factor. I don't think that's going to happen.
Gilles, are you prepared at Virtuos for the streaming invasion?
We're on board. I mean, we're believers. We think that 5G will enable the gaming's equivalent to Netflix or Spotify. And there's no reason for the gaming industry to not be affected by it. I also think it's going to be a bumpy ride. We've been through, as a company, we've been through 2 platform transitions already, and every time was bumpy. I think this one involves more fundamental technology changes. So in theory, it should be even more bumpy. What I mean by that is publishers going out of business because they totally miss a turn, or projects being delayed or cancelled because they were planning to be on a certain kind of platform. They're realizing that, whoa, no, it doesn't make sense anymore. We need to rework this for another 2 years. So what this means for vendors and for a company like Virtuos is you need to have some cash on the side, and you'd be prepared for accidents or bumps to happen.
So proceed with caution, but definitely
for the next 2 years. I don't think it's going to be I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think it's going to be a nice, smooth growth like we've had in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Robyn, what do you think streaming is going to mean for you guys?
I think it's going to change so many things. Like it's just an entirely different world where you can play whatever you want to play on a single device or multiple devices that are all related, and you will play differently. Like the notion of what a HD game is on a PS4 becomes more converged with what do you do with your companion app, which is now a separate thing, but now becomes part of the whole game experience. I mean, and everything is available in every place. I mean, it's a little bit mind-blowing.
We're almost seeing that a little bit with Fortnite in a way, right? Where it is almost everywhere, and people are playing cross-platform except on PlayStation. It feels like it feels like we're taking steps to that, and also the recent Xbox All Access announcement is really kind of a price dropper, and it feels like Microsoft is really edging in that direction too. Are you excited for our streaming future, and why isn't Netflix just streaming video games?
I think there's a difference in the medium. I think it's a mistake to think of video games as Netflix. I think we're looking at a race for providing content quickly enough, faster than our consumers can eat it. In the same way that Netflix is always generating new content, we need to generate new content as well. But the difference is they need experiences that are interactive. We need experiences that are interactive and that keep players engaged long term. We need to keep building worlds that get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think it's going to be a race towards the infinite world. A world where players can play in it endlessly and never reach the boundary. We've played around with that like a No Man's Sky or a game like that, but I think crafted content that we are generating with our partners and providing that to users. And let's face it, we're looking at playing games on the cloud. A lot of the constraints that we've had in the past of how big a game can be will vanish. And again, that comes back to technology. And that's what we're looking at right now in Winnipeg, is how do we create games that we can build that have no constraints?
Yeah.
How do we manage the pipelines, the tools, and the way that we create content in order to provide the infinite world to our gamers? I mean, it's a huge challenge, but that's the way we're going to be building games 10 years from now. We're going to be building one huge game all over the world. And I think about like Ready Player One. To me, we're going in that direction.
Yeah. Let's talk about risk-taking. Regardless of whether you are a AAA developer or a vendor providing services to games, I trust that you all have to make some pretty big bets on occasion. Darryl or Robyn, what would you say are the big risks you need to take in leveraging partners to help build your games? Robyn?
This might not feel so risky to some of you in the room, but I think for Bioware, we have to really think about co-dev in a really meaningful way, which is not just content providers, but how do we share development, how do we share design?
Right.
Because I do think it is true. The world that we want our users to experience is getting bigger and bigger and continues on and on and on and on through a live service model. So how do you do that? Well, you can just outsource pieces, or you can find a way to develop experiences together, and I think that that's the place that we will have to go. And I don't think it's that far away for us either.
Right. Bioware is such a narrative-driven company. There's an expectation of these immense stories, but do you presently just bring the writing team into the studio, or do you spread that out across the community out there? A lot of writers don't want to leave Los Angeles.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, actually, just like philosophically, what's our goal? And I think right now our writers are kind of, we hold them tight and precious.
Yeah.
But what does that look like in a subscription world? I mean, a Bioware game is an end-to-end story with a bunch of branching and really great experiences, but in a world where you're doing, multiple releases, or you're continuing on in a live service, or even with Anthem, where we have a 4-player experience, so you don't have as much control of the story as we historically have had. Like, what does that look like? And I think we need to start to be open-minded about that too, which would feel like a really big risk, because I think story is our thing, right?
Yeah.
That's us.
Yeah. Andrew, let's talk a little bit about some of the examples of big bets that you need to take in your business to stay relevant and at the top of your game. And we've already talked about the acquisitions a little bit, but what else do you have to do?
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, to your point about staying relevant is important. I think we seek to make ourselves more relevant to our clients all the time. So you will have seen us, for instance, bring some new technologies to the table. We recently set up a Keywords Venture Fund, which is designed primarily to find technologies, solutions that are perhaps outside the games industry,
right,
and bring those into the games industry as some sort of extra value that we can provide to our clients. We also have invested in some very sort of niche services where I think there's an opportunity to allow our clients to share some common sort of world-leading expertise in fields like music management, whether it's licensing or having music being composed or managing live music events and so on and so forth. So I think the sort of bets that we're placing, I guess, are going a little bit outside of what you might traditionally think of as co-development services for the video games industry.
Sure.
And trying to bring those into the industry.
Awesome. Let's discuss diversity. There's a lot of talk in the industry about increasing diversity, whether it be having a better balanced gender ratio at studios or infusing development teams with more culturally diverse talent. What are your teams specifically doing to embrace diversity as a business leader? What are your expectations for the impact in having more diverse talent? We'll start with you, Gilles.
So, as a foreign company started out in China, the cultural diversity or the racial diversity is there by definition. Yeah. Something we have worked on more is ensuring that the workplace that we have is considered a great workplace for women.
Yep.
Our largest studio was started and managed for a long time by a woman. Second studio in China is also managed by a woman, and we have around 30% of our staff who are women, which is something that I'm quite proud about in an industry which is traditionally been male dominated.
Darryl, what about at Ubisoft Winnipeg?
Well, the idea of diversity and gender balance is extremely important. I think it's key to our long-term success. Ubisoft is a already multinational company with studios all over the world.
Yes.
But I think that's where a lot of our creativity comes from right now. Creativity is when you get people who don't necessarily share the same viewpoint, and they get together and they come up with a novel solution that blows your mind. And I think there's so much work that we can do to improve that. I mean, we're engaging young women and girls as early as possible and get them into technology and digital media career paths really, really young, so that they know that they have that opportunity, so that they're encouraged to get into it. I don't think that there's too much that we can do. I think that there's something we need to work at every single day to make this happen. And in the end, I honestly believe that the diversity and gender balance will make us better video game creators.
Right. Robyn, Bioware has a fantastic history of diversity in its games. What about in the studio, and what's the culture like in the studio?
I think it's something we spend a lot of time thinking about. We've been pretty proactive in many fronts, in engaging more with women in particular earlier, so even going back to high school, because that's where people start to make decisions about where their lives are going to go. And so if you start opening women's eyes to the notion that video games can be a meaningful career for you when they're 15, that's way more successful than hitting them when they've got their graduate degree in something or other.
Right.
So we look at that. We look at job descriptions. We look at our interview panels to make sure that the representation there is very diverse. Language is a really important thing. And we also look at our games themselves just to make sure that we are really being true to our goal to represent diversity in the products that we make. I mean, a lot of women play games. It's not a niche thing anymore where few women do it. And so how can we engage women with the experiences we provide as games in a more meaningful way? So I think we think about it at every single level of the organization all the time.
Right.
Which
and
is great.
Keywords is so big, Andrew. How do you sort of manifest this kind of openness?
Yeah, it is large. We have over 5,000 people on the payroll, but they're spread around 43, I think it is, studios at the moment. Quite a lot of those studios are actually run by women. And in each studio, obviously, the mix does vary a little bit between women and men, depending on the activity they're engaged in. So we're fortunate that we have quite a lot of activity in the language-based business, and that seems to attract a bit more of an even balance between men and women.
Right.
In art as well, we find quite a decent penetration of women compared to men. And in some areas, for instance, like functional testing, it's perhaps a little bit more male-oriented. But even then, I'm surprised, year on year, we're attracting more and more females into the business. And one of the nice things about those sort of jobs is that they're very much sort of entry-level jobs into the industry as a whole, and people go on from keywords testing, for instance, into many careers in our client organizations and so on. So I think as an industry, we still have a lot to do to make jobs in the industry more appealing to women. And maybe it's just talking about it more, because I look at the jobs and I think they're really great jobs. If I had a job like that when I was that age, it would have been great. So yeah, we've got more work to do, but we do monitor it, and report in my desk only last week on not only gender balance, but also pay equality.
Right.
And I'm pleased to say, touch wood, we're doing pretty well on all of that. So.
That's great. Yeah, it's definitely an important topic, especially in the in the aftermath of stories coming out of companies like Riot, which was probably never intentional to be what happened with that studio, but good can come out of all of that, hopefully. Okay, Robyn and Darryl, there are probably some service providers in the audience who are considering making the transition to be able to offer higher value co-development services, like the ability to create full levels or game game modes for clients. In your opinion, what does it take for a service provider to go from traditional partner with a limited ownership to performing complex co-development with greater ownership? And what growing pains can you share with this group, Robyn?
Yikes. So it's not a problem that we can solve on our own. So I think from my perspective, it would be we would want to find a partner that we had experience with, where we had consistent quality, good communication, and that we both had a desire to work together in a different way. And then I think it's a problem we have to solve together. Like, we're not magically going to come up with a pipeline or a method or anything else that's going to make that work. And it really has to be a conversation. And for me, that's what I'm interested in finding, is the partner that's willing to engage in that conversation, knowing that there are going to be some bumps along the way and some problems that we're going to have to solve. Because for us, for Bioware, for sure, it's super early days in thinking about that.
Awesome. We're getting close to the end, so I'm going to skip on to the next question, and then we have a very important final question. And this is for Andrew or Gilles, sorry. I'm sorry. At XDS 2017, Sam Carlisle delivered a talk called Welcome Player 2 Has Entered the Game. It dealt with the subject of the emergence of real-time technologies in other industries like film and visual effects, and the impact that will have on external development. Have you seen the services you offer and your client base change as a result? For example, are you working with more non-game related companies in the area of real-time, and has that put a strain on resources traditionally reserved for game clients? And I think, Gilles, you're probably a perfect person to ask about that.
So we are seeing that to a limited extent. It's not a secret that ILM is one of our old clients, movie business.
Who?
ILM, small studio, and it's no secret that they have an interest for real-time engine in production, and so do we.
Cool.
So this is for the benefit of the movie industry, an area that we're engaged in. When it comes to other industries, we receive a lot of requests, and so far we have stayed away because we really want to focus on our core business, which is providing content for games.
Right.
ILM is the only exception, but everything else we do is for games. There's so much to do that our growth is going to be around.
Do you get a lot of calls from games because you work on Star Wars Rebels and
I think it contributes to our image and to our know-how. So yes, we do, and this is why we've kept doing it, even though producing movies is not our core business.
Okay, and Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no accident that we are getting demand from outside the games industry for some of the services that we provide. I think when we look at ourselves as a games industry, I mean, we are sitting at the very pinnacle of the most interactive form of content there is.
The very best form of content there.
The very best form of very interactive content.
Yes.
And a lot of industries look at the games industry and wish they could make their content more interactive, because if you can make it interactive, you make it stickier and more engaging and so on, right? So yeah, we have people from the retail space that are looking at using game technology, whether it's AR or VR or whatever, to make experiences in that space. We have museums and educational people that are using game technology to make interactive experiences, either in a physical setting or for learning purposes. And we do get involved in that a little bit. We don't actively hunt it, but it does come to our door, and you know, if it's interesting and if it helps us push the boundaries a little bit, we certainly look at it. One thing I would say for us as a service provider is we're absolutely intent on not making our own content, not competing with our clients. But what this sort of engagement allows us to do is to give projects to our people that they can make end to end, but that are not competing in the game space.
So some potentially great licensed games again. which would be great. Actually, everybody should check out the behind the scenes on Ready Player One, because obviously it fuses a lot of what we know about video game development and characters. But to see Steven Spielberg get into these virtual spaces with his virtual camera and just be this kid in a candy store, it's just
That's
incredible.
a perfect example.
Yeah.
So we actually worked on that game.
Oh,
So,
great.
Yeah, so we do get pulled in these directions a little bit.
That's fantastic.
Sorry, that game, that movie. So.
Okay, well, this is the final question of the day, and it's for Robyn and Darryl. Looking in your crystal ball, are games big enough now that you can't even conceive of development without external partners, or do you envision a day when there could be a renaissance of independent internal teams that develop games without the reliance of outside support? Robyn?
Yes and yes.
Nice.
So I can't conceive of making the games we currently make today without our external partners. Like, they are essential to our ability to deliver in a timely fashion. We don't want to spend 10 years making a game, and if we're going to do all the content ourselves, that's pretty much what it's going to look like.
Yep.
And I think they bring other benefits. So the big games, the way that Bioware thinks about games, the games we make today, absolutely. But I also love the idea of those little indie studios where, you know, it's like, remember when you had a game team and you could like all see each other in the same space? And
Is there a culture at BioWare that wants to do that at BioWare? And maybe put a small group together to build something that maybe is perfect for streaming because it's not a huge title? Or?
That's a great question, and yes, I think there is. There's definitely, there are people in the organization who would love to do that. And one of the things I like about the idea of going to more of a subscription service or streaming service, or just thinking about the way we deliver our games to users differently, it allows us to think in different ways about what we make. And so maybe we can make something small and something large, and we can vary that a little bit. And I love that idea because it keeps our people fresh and engaged and happy, and I think that would show in the product as well. So.
And it's very healthy. And Darryl, do you share some of those sentiments?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we've talked about AI and automation and those things allowing us to create more. But I think part of it too is, like, if we develop a new tool that allows a lot of our creators to generate much more content, we're not going to lay people off. We're going to use those other people to make more games. So right now the strategy, I believe, at Ubisoft is having more smaller teams making more games, just exactly for that kind of culture, so that we can get back to that more indie spirit of people that are passionate about doing something really, really well.
Very good. We are counting down right to our hour, so why don't we use this time to give our panelists a round of applause. Wasn't that awesome? Weren't they great?